Yes, so yeah, we're here in Vancouver. Fortunately, Vancouver as a city hasn't been as badly affected as others, but that doesn't mean it can't change. And so everyone is, of course, taking the precautions necessary, both offset and onset. In terms of being on set, we're all tested 3 times a week. We are wearing masks as much as possible. In scenes, we take them off, but right up until that moment, we'll be wearing masks. Everyone is keeping their distance. The set itself it feels like a much quieter place. The camera operators are sort of removed from it, and they're operating from outside the room remotely on a crane, and so it does feel different, but it should feel different. I think if I was like, yeah, it's just like normal, back to normal, then that would be wrong, and it doesn't feel that way. But we all do feel like the set is a very safe place to be, and we feel lucky to be able to get back to work and tell these stories. Yes, it's certainly it is certainly a struggle for Shaun because it's a complete unknown, especially initially in those early stages. Shaun is so well prepared and has so much knowledge and has learned so much from his textbooks, but then he's faced with something that no one knew anything about and had to think about and learn on their feet. And so it's certainly tricky for Shaun at the beginning. I mean, because we're sort of circling around the pandemic a little bit anyway, I did want to say that I think the most important thing for all of us when wanting to portray it for these first 2 episodes was to pay tribute to the real life healthcare professionals and, first line workers who have been, heroic, but heroic in the face of such trauma over these last few months. And I think for all of us, it's really just put into perspective how, as actors, we're just playing doctors on television, and that means nothing compared to what people are really doing out there every single day. And it would have felt wrong, and we would have been shirking a sense of responsibility to them, I think, to not want to portray that on television. And so that's sort of where it all began in terms of wanting to tell that story. But you're right, it was difficult for the writers to know, how, when we started filming, or we'd hoped to start in the early summer, the writing had been starting already in the spring in those initial stages of the pandemic. And so how could one ever know 4 or 5 months later when the show comes out whether the reality that we would have been portraying back then would be right now? And so I think these first 2 episodes that do track the pandemic over a period of months is in some ways a response to that. It's showing how these doctors over the course of several months, as things change, as more information comes in, as we learn more and more about this virus, how everyone is responding to it. I'd say that it was more an individual sense of research, in terms of there wasn't a kind of collective getting together when talking about how real life doctors have been dealing with the pandemic. But certainly, in terms of the writing staff, there's constant discussions with real life doctors that have continued through this time. And then I'd say it's more up to the sort of individual actor in terms of what they find useful preparation wise for their role and what they choose to draw on to figure out what works for their character. It's hard to know exactly how to answer the question, but the focus of the rest of the season won't be the pandemic. There may be some references to it in some fashion, but it won't always feel like we are in the middle of a pandemic when in a hospital. The hospital life will focus on patients who don't have the coronavirus, and so the doctors who are around them won't be taking those precautions that would be perhaps more medically necessary when dealing with them, but it won't feel like the virus is like completely just gone and disappeared and everything is okay. So it's kind of a mixed bag. And before the episodes, because, you know, we don't want to be seen to be encouraging people to think that this is in any way over in reality. There's a sort of statement that goes before every episode that will, you know, that will say exactly that this is a more hopeful future that we're going to be portraying now on the show, but that doesn't mean that it isn't important to still follow all of the guidelines to keep everyone safe on a day-to-day basis in reality. I think what was exciting to explore in season 3 was, you know, those early stages of love, and Shaun, both with Lea and with Carly, that sort of early fun and joy of, you know, that initial kind of, whoa, I'm falling in love with someone for the first time. And I think season 4 is about the more deeper, more nuanced, you know, flavors of a relationship that will develop over time, especially at the beginning when they're dealing with, you know, the repercussions of trying to keep their distance and not being able to be together during the pandemic because of the nature of Shaun's job. That will prove challenging, but I'm really excited to see their relationship deepen and grow over time, and getting into those, you know, what it means to be with someone long term, rather than what does it mean in that first initial throw of love. It will be difficult for Shaun. It's going to be exciting to watch. I think Shaun is, for this, you know, for the first time really this year, he's going to have to take responsibility for other people. He's going to be a boss. There are going to be younger residents who are coming in underneath him who he's going to have to take under his wing. And he's very good when it comes to imparting medical knowledge and insight. I think, as you allude to, where he will struggle is the more personal aspects of the job, and the, you know, the inevitable moment when one of his younger patients ends up losing a patient or does something wrong or makes a mistake. How will Shaun react in that situation, and will he be able to be there for them, and be there able to comfort them and uplift them and get them ready to do it again the very next day? So it will be exciting to explore both those kind of deeper emotional moments that the show always seeks to mine, and also, you know, the fun, I think, and the joy and the humor that will come from getting to see Shaun in these positions of authority over other people, and telling people what to do. Obviously, that's a very broad question, but I hope that through the character of Shaun, we'll continue to do justice to his story, and therefore, you know, more widely help start a discussion about autism, and how, you know, more specifically people with autism can work within a hospital environment and can be successful within it. I think the other thing that we're always aware of and have been aware of is that Shaun can't represent everyone who is on the spectrum, and we're telling his one individual story that feels right for him, but that doesn't mean that it will be something that everyone who has autism will be able to feel a connection to, in the same way that if you have a neurotypical lead doctor of a television show, everyone who is neurotypical in the world won't necessarily see themselves in that. But hopefully it is something that will, you know, continue to spark a discussion and start, you know, those sort of greater in-depth research that is of course necessary to understand autism more fully. There are many reactions that I'll never forget that the show has sort of afforded me. It feels, I guess the most personal ones and the ones that are most meaningful feel somehow wrong to share as a story, because it doesn't feel like the right way of going about it. But I definitely will say that those moments are the most meaningful, and make the show feel important to continue to work on, and they're the most inspiring, and so I'm very grateful to have had those moments, and I feel very lucky really to get to play the character of Shaun, and to have, you know, that responsibility. It's not something that I take lightly. I mean, I'd like to think that there are kind of two different reasons for it. I think one of them is maybe the more obvious reason, that it deals with, you know, the most sort of elemental and important things that all humans will go through inevitably, which is living and, you know, giving birth to people and starting up in life, and then also at some stage inevitably passing away. And so I think in terms of the thematic events that go on within a hospital, they're things that everyone necessarily will be able to connect to, and that feel incredibly important, because they're the most important questions that none of us necessarily have the answers to. But I'd also like to think that even though, you know, that thematic kind of interest is what draws people in, I think it's also the characters on these medical shows, and, you know, whether it's The Good Doctor or whether other, you know, of the sort of many other medical dramas that have been successful over time, I think it is those, you know, those characters that draw you in. And I think on The Good Doctor, you know, what it's been is the character of, or at least from my perspective, you know, the character of Shaun, who had a different viewpoint on the world. He was sort of the reverse of Dr. House, that I think was obviously so cynical, and perhaps what people needed when when they were going through slightly more optimistic times in general. He felt exciting to watch, and maybe now we've moved towards a space where we're looking for someone who offers a little bit more hope, and who sees the good in people, and who you know, doesn't prejudge anyone, and is asking genuine questions, genuinely trying to figure out other people's opinions rather than arriving with preconceived notions of what they should be. And so I think, you know, for those two reasons, that they're the things that make a medical drama successful. I think I've said this before, but it is definitely true. I think that David Shaw and I have discussed this a few times. Maybe it's even more true for David Shaw, having written the character of House before. But I think, you know, maybe as a Brit, I think we have a natural tendency towards cynicism. And Shaun has made, you know, Shaun is the opposite of that. And I think I have been, you know, sort of see the world slightly more optimistically now, because of spending time with Shaun and getting to play him. And I think David would say the same too, in terms of being in the mind space of, rather than the sort of caustic Dr. House.